and he has this great project involving Jeffrey Epstein that he's working on. So please welcome to the show, Nick Bryant. How are you, Nick?
I'm good. How are you?
Nick, we're doing great. Thank you for joining us. We didn't introduce you. That's Johnny in the hat with glasses. That's Xavier. I'm Sam. Thank you for joining us today. Nick, before we get into it, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where our listeners can find you?
You can find me at, I live in the heart of Manhattan, about 4 blocks away from Times Square. So nickbryantnyc.com. That's my website.
NYC.com. I love it, buddy. I'm very excited to have you on the show. And Nick, before we get into everything, can you tell us a little bit about this project you're working on?
I started Epstein just some time ago. I wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal, and it was about an interstate trafficking network that was covered up by federal authorities. And it had an intelligence nexus and blackmail. And it's like a carbon copy of Epstein, pretty much. I think it was bigger than Epstein's network, but Epstein's network went on much longer. And with the Franklin scandal, I really do show that these kids were being flown around. And actually, there were grand juries used to cover it up. And I can talk about grand juries a little later, but grand juries are infamous for covering things up because a special prosecutor is chosen and he decides what evidence is shown to the grand jurors, who are just people that have shown up for jury duty. And it's really, the special prosecutor can show them whatever he wants and call whatever witnesses he wants. And there was a New York Supreme Court justice that said special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. So, and with the Franklin scandal, it took 3 grand juries to cover that up. And with Epstein, 1 grand jury was used. With the Franklin scandal, there were two grand juries. There was a state grand jury in Nebraska. There was a federal grand jury. And then because a lot of those kids were pandered to DC power brokers, there was a federal grand jury in DC. All these resources went into covering up the Franklin scandal. With Epstein, you have a kind of a similar dynamic because there was a grand jury that was called. The Palm Beach Police Department wanted to indict him on 5 counts of different types of child abuse. And they were ready to go with the indictments. And then the case got yanked from them and it was given to a grand jury. And at that point, the Palm Beach Police Department had 5 underage girls that had given them statements, but then they had a number of corroborating statements, but they knew of 17 more. So the Palm Beach Police Department with Epstein knew of 23 underage victims. And what did it do? Barry Kirshner was the special prosecutor, and he called 1 of those kids, only one, and skewered her. So that grand jury did not come back with any indictments against Jeffrey Epstein for child abuse. And actually, in the Franklin scandal, there were 2 kids that wouldn't recant their abuse, and they were indicted on multiple counts of perjury.
Yep. I've watched docs on that, and it's incredibly traumatic to see that happen to those kids. On this show, we talk about a bunch of cultural stuff, and this conspiracy show, and there's a lot of Christian listeners, which I love, and I'm very much, I push back against this kind of push to demonize certain sexualities and stuff like that. I'm always like, if you're doing stuff with consenting adults, I want nothing to do. You don't have to tell me. I don't need to know anything. I don't want anything to do with that. I think there's so much goes on to blackmailing of people. But when you get into the child stuff, it gets really, really dark and really, really scary. And I think that the reason that people aren't up in arms is because they just don't want to look into how dark this stuff really, really gets. And so we had the reason I brought up the sexual stuff earlier is because I watched a video last night. It's about by an author. I forget what his name is, but he was talking that a lot that there's things about Watergate that didn't make sense, the wiretappings and any of that, and that there was actually a lot of it came from a call girl ring that Democrats were going to, and they were basically blackmailing them through that, and they had to come up with a way to say that they'd gotten the information. And we demonize his sexuality and stuff, but it's so crazy to me that sex is used as such a blackmailing scheme for through time, right? I mean, it's kind of great. Now, I'm not saying, oh, we got to accept pedophilia. I think they're scumbags. Children are precious. I want to make sure everyone knows that. And if you listen to the show, you know that's my thought. But it is crazy how sex is used to blackmail people.
With our politicians, you've got highly sexed alpha males. And they also, in that psychological alchemy, they also have tremendous arrogance and just a lust for power. And nothing makes people stupid like arrogance, lust, and greed. Those three things, and our politicians have a trifecta of that. So they're quite easy to blackmail. And political blackmail has been going on in the U.S. forever. Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old woman, and her husband was blackmailing Alexander Hamilton. And there was a muckraker that outed Alexander Hamilton's affair. And then Thomas Jefferson got elected president. And Thomas Jefferson, the muckraker journalist thought that Jefferson owed him an appointment in his administration because he had outed Hamilton and Hamilton's affair. And Jefferson said no. And so he outed Jefferson with having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings.
Oh, man.
It just goes on and on and on. And I'll give you a couple of examples of recent politicians that have been blackmailed. There was actually, it was kind of interesting. Last month, Tim Burchett, a representative from Tennessee, basically came out and said a lot of my colleagues are blackmailed. And I've been saying that for 21 years. And so it's kind of nice to see a federal representative saying that. But Larry Craig comes to mind when it comes to, he was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years. First as a federal representative and then as a senator. And his libido was out of control. He was gay. And I wrote a book called Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail. And I wrote it with Henry Vincent, who ran a gay escort service, and the CIA assets would use his escorts to blackmail these closeted politicians. So Larry Craig used Henry's escort service innumerable times. But then there was a documentary that came out by Kirby Dick called Outrage, and it showed that Craig was getting escorts from other services. And then finally, he was busted in a Minneapolis airport trying to pick up a vice squad officer. This is a U.S. senator. And it's funny, I'm from Minneapolis, and I have used those bathrooms before. And I was sitting on the throne once, and someone was slapping their foot against the floor. And I just thought they had a neurological disorder. I didn't know that was like gay people signaling each other. And so that's how Craig got busted. The vice squad guy was slapping his foot on the floor, and then Craig, whatever, slapped his foot on, I don't know. Who knows? But I always got a kick out of that because when he got busted doing that, I thought to myself, wow, I remember being in that bathroom.
I remember his excuse was having a wide stance. He said, I had a wide stance.
And it's just like, how does that spread? How is there a chat board? Is it word of mouth? Hey, dude, tap 3 times and a literal gay fairy will show up and a magic will happen. And
what's it? Not 3 times on the, what is it?
Tony Orlando.
Yeah.
I mean, Sam, you fly a lot. Have you ever had any signs like that where you're like, okay, is this
I
a
told
turn on?
Johnny, like one time recently, I was at like a Delta Lounge or United Lounge. I forget which one it was. And I was eating there, and there's a guy in front of me, an older man. And this one dude just keeps walking back and forth and like eyeballing him hard, like trying to make hard contact. And I was like, that is and then the guy kept going, what is it? What does this guy do? I'm like, oh man, that's some looking for love drive-bys right there, dude. But it's just, to me, it's so crazy to me to try to hook up in an airport, and like, how does that become a thing? It's just weird.
But this guy is a U.S. senator.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, that's
like,
weird too.
I mean, and he's been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years. I mean, a kid with a smartphone doing an after-school project could blackmail Larry Craig.
Now, can I ask you, do you think that that's more about him being afraid of blackmail through, let's say, I don't know, this is not the exact correct term, but more legitimate sources for that kind of thing, like brothels, because he knows that those are just all blackmail houses? Is that possible? Is that why he would get pushed to kind of bathrooms and those kinds of things? Or is he just that much of a sex crazed maniac?
His libido is out of control.
Okay.
So in the Franklin scandal, which is very much like the Epstein scandal, I got to one of those blackmail photographers, and he was a rather unctuous character. But when you dig into stories like this, you're going to meet unctuous characters, and I was kind of cutting my teeth on the story, and I said, how does this work? And he said, it's like you're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and you can have anything you want on the yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. So with Larry Craig, he physically took himself off the yacht and got busted in Minneapolis. There's no way he wouldn't have gotten busted in Washington, D.C. doing the stuff that he was doing. And I'll give you another example. Dennis Hastert. Now, he was a child molester going back 40 years, and when he was a teacher at a high school, and his rise was meteoric in politics, and he was the Speaker of the House for 7 years.
Yeah.
And there was a FBI whistleblower named Sibel Edmonds, and she said this deposition was sealed for a while, but then it got unsealed. She said that the FBI knew about Hastert, what Hastert was up to. So he was obviously protected. And actually, I think, because I've been at this for 21 years looking at blackmail and things like that, I think because he was blackmailed, it helped his career. He became Speaker of the House for 7 years, which I think is one of the longest reigning Republican Speakers of the House ever. And so I think that his being compromised was a good career move for him. And it's very strange because he decided to get off the yacht. He got busted a while back because one of his high school victims was shaking him down. And for some reason, the FBI could have gone to that guy and said, if you continue to shake Dennis Hastert down, bad things are going to happen to you. But the FBI didn't go to that guy. They busted Hastert on some banking technicalities. So for some reason, Hastert, and this guy's a pedophile going back 40 years. And probably longer. So for some reason, Hastert decided to get off the yacht. And I think it was greed. He was making a lot of money in a lobbying business that he had. And I think that he probably said, I'm Dennis Hastert, I can step on anybody's toes. So I think that's what happened with him. But those are two highly esteemed legislators.
Let me ask you something about that, like this stepping off the yacht thing. Do you ever think that maybe at some point that these guys are no longer useful to them, that there is a kind of there's some collateral for the FBI to act like they're busting the highest levels of politicians so that they could seem like, oh, look, we're doing hard work here. Because, and I totally agree with you. If you are compromised, and we don't just see that in politics, we see it in Hollywood, where like, if you're a compromised person, you get pushed to the front of the line because they can control you. They can get you to say things that maybe you don't necessarily agree with, but you want, I have friends of mine who are personal friends with Robert Kennedy Jr. By all accounts, these people who I trust say he's the nicest guy. But, suddenly he comes out, he's on Epstein's flight logs, and he's like super, and not to get into politics, but he's super pro-Israel. And people have said they've had conversations with him in the private that he wasn't like that. So do you think it's like the promotion of these people get so they could, let's say, if the powers that be have to, let's say, push the culture or the news or whatever in a certain way, they can use them one way or the other, and then when they're no longer have that influence, they can use them as just a sign of like, look, we're really hard law enforcement. We go after everybody.
I have a tendency to think that Dennis Hastert got off the yacht because there's an amazing omerta when you're molesting kids together. It's a pact. It's an omerta. And he was molesting kids with other people that we know of. So I just don't. He bought into that omerta. And that's a very rarefied omerta. It's much more intact than the mafia omerta, at least these days. So my thoughts on that are, as I said, he got too greedy, and he stepped on the wrong toes. That's how I read it. I tried to reach out to him. I'm an investigative journalist. I get people's numbers, and he wasn't very talkative. When he talked. He didn't really want to talk to me. And I felt like saying, Denny, man, you're already outed. You're a pederast. You did some time. Come on, cough it up.
What do you got to lose?
Well, I think he does have family. So I think he's got something to lose. And the people that are the blackmailers, there's some dark malignant corner of intelligence that does that, and they're not very benevolent people. I think that there's a zero-sum game when it comes to forgiveness with them, and those are the kind of people that are unfortunately running our country. And I can give you an example of that. So Epstein, that state grand jury came back didn't indict Epstein on a single count of child abuse. That indicted him on one count of adult solicitation. And Michael Ryder, who's a real hero in this, he was the police chief for Palm Beach Police Department. Real hero. I mean, this guy did not stand down. He was vociferous. He was trailed, he was shadowed, he was stalked. There were dead animals found on his doorstep. I mean, but the dude would not back down. And ultimately, the Department of Justice, he got so vociferous that the Department of Justice stepped in, and Alexander Acosta was the U.S. Attorney for Southern Florida. And Acosta had a list of over 30 Epstein victims at that point, over 30. And I've got the list. When you look at all these girls on this list, it's kind of stunning. And he was going to go after Epstein, but then he was told he had to stand down. And he was told that Epstein was intelligence, and he's never denied saying that. When he was labor secretary for a while, and he was getting vetted by the Trump organization. They said, well, why'd you give Jeffrey Epstein a free pass? And he said, well, I was told he was intelligence and to back down. But if you look at how we're set up constitutionally, there's only two people that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the attorney general and one is the president. So for Alexander Acosta to be told to stand down, that order comes, and those orders can be delivered by a minion of the president or a minion of the attorney general. But
how about the FBI?
It ultimately emanates from the apex of power. And that's how much power this dark, malignant corner of our intelligence has, that they can tell U.S. attorneys to stand down.
Yeah, it's crazy. Hey guys, real quick, I want to tell you about our friends at Babbel. Listen, the best way to learn a language, immersion, okay? Living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel, okay? But I want to start real quickly with, again, the Franklin scandal. And then we'll get back into Epstein and we'll get into all that stuff that went down in Florida and get your thoughts on, the relationship between Trump and all them. But a lot of times there's this notion within the social media that this pedophile blackmailing schemes tend to be on one side of the aisle more than the other, which is the Democratic Party. And I always push back that both sides are in on it. And, that the Franklin scandal goes all the way to the White House and what I believe is George Bush Sr. and his involvement. There's a famous, and I listen, who knows if this is real or not, but there was that doc on, I think, Netflix, What Happened to Johnny or Where's Johnny?
I co-produced that.
Okay. Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah.
So did you believe? Wow, I didn't know that. That's amazing. So did you believe that there was a picture of George Bush with Johnny? There was a famous picture where people are like, is this Johnny in the background? And something that his mother said that Johnny had come and visited her. Do you put any validity into any of that?
I put validity. I do believe that Johnny visited his mother. And actually, I've got I did a podcast. I found out where he was taken to a house in Colorado. And I found the house and I found the guy who owned the house. And he was a pedophile. He'd been a pedophile. He'd been busted since 1963. He got first busted in 1963. His name is Charles Crouch. And he's still alive. And I tried to get law enforcement involved, but they seem to have backed down. But yes, Johnny was taken to this house, and Paul Benassi was one of the Franklin victims who wouldn't recant. And he told America's Most Wanted that there's this house in Colorado that's near an elephant-shaped rock that has a chamber beneath the house. And they found the house, and they saw the elephant-shaped rock, and they found the chamber. And I've got letters that were written to Paul Benassi when he was in prison, talking about JG. And so, yes, I definitely believe that Johnny Gosh, he was alive. I firmly believe he was alive 10 years ago. I haven't really looked for him recently, but yes, he was definitely alive. And I definitely believe he talked to his mother. Now, when he gets into George Bush, I don't know. But I will say the Franklin scandal was about power brokers in the Republican Party. So it was little boys getting pandered to Republicans, and with Epstein, you got little girls pandered to, or you got little girls pandered to Democrats. So that seems to be the partisan divide in our Congress. So, is that Republicans like little boys and Democrats like little girls?
That's kind of crazy to me. That's insane. So I mean, maybe I'm wrong. And listen, I partied a lot in the past. I fried through a few brain cells, so I'm not a perfect human being in any way.
I have myself too.
Yeah. So I don't know why, but I remember this quote saying that on the island that the girl said that Flynn never fooled around with them, that he actually fooled around with the boys. Are you saying that the Epstein thing never involved the boys?
It might have, but I'm not aware of it. And I've been digging into Epstein since 2012. And that's when I first acquired his black book. And it took me 3 years of pitching it before I could get it up on the internet and write some articles about it. So I've been digging into Epstein since 2012, and I've heard of little boys, but I've never been able to nail that. But I will say this. I do believe that there were girls under the age of 10.
Wow.
involved with Epstein, because I know two therapists, and one is a nationally recognized psychologist, and she has been on all kinds of documentaries and television shows, and she had a victim, or she counseled a girl that said that, or young woman that said that she was part of the Epstein network, and when she was under 10, and she described Epstein's home and described a park near Epstein's house and described a number of other things. And then I know another therapist who also believes that her client, who was under 10 too, was molested by Epstein et al. Now, Epstein seemed to like pubescent girls, but like with the Franklin scandal, Lawrence King liked pubescent boys. But if you were a client of his and you wanted a 7-year-old, I mean, these guys are psychopaths. They'll give, if you want a 7-year-old, they'll get you a 7-year-old. If you want a 10-year-old, they'll get you a 10-year-old. I mean, it's
that's something the media the media doesn't want to acknowledge. They want to say everything's 15 and up, maybe 16.
Yeah, they want to make it like, hey, dude, come on, they're high school chicks. You know, high school chicks like it. Come on. I mean, that's the whole vibe that they put out on this thing.
It's highly sanitized, because the cover story is that none of them were under 14. Actually, there was a 13-year-old that was molested by Epstein that got a settlement. But that Epstein Victims Compensation Fund is really a beautiful cover-up tool. 250, the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. That's who these victims are suing. But it's an amazing cover-up tool. I'll tell you how it works. It was David Boies was one of the architects of it, and David Boies is a nasty piece of work. I've got a podcast called The Cleanup Crew, which you guys can watch, and I kind of delineate how David Boies is kind of a nasty piece of work. But he was one of the architects of this Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, and 250 women have applied for money, and 225 have applied for money, and 150 have been granted settlements. 8 have not have declined, because if you get money from that fund, and this fund is doing something that the government can't do, if you get money from that fund, and we don't even know the criteria for, it's all done in secrecy. We don't even know the criteria, because some victims get like large amounts and some victims get small amounts. But anyway, if you get any money from that fund, you cannot sue anyone else. You cannot sue any of your perpetrators.
Of course.
So that Epstein Compensation Fund is superlative as a cover-up tool to keep these girls.
And David Boies, he represented Weinstein and Theranos. I mean, he's been associated with some of the nastiest people, the nastiest folks.
And he's fond of Black Cube. It's a Israeli intelligence service.
Oh, there we go.
retired Mossad guys. He sicked Black Cube on Rose McGowan. Yeah, because Rose McGowan was in the first wave of actresses that said that she'd been molested by Harvey Weinstein, and he sicked Black Cube on New York Times journalists who were writing an expose on Harvey Weinstein, and then he sicked Black Cube on people that were saying bad things about Theranos. So, in the PowerPoint about the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, I call him David Black Cube Boies.
That's the guy.
So my question is this: and we'll get into more of the blackmail stuff in a few, but were most of the children used for this? Are these from foster cares, or are these kids, especially when we get into the girls, are we talking about girls who just wanted to be modeled and told if you do this, you have a chance to be a model down the line? But because I often talk about, the role of foster care in a lot of the problems that we have today. And these are children, and it breaks my heart to say this, that don't have a lot of options out there. So they go into foster care, and I hate even saying it because it's so gross, but Jared from Subway was like, she doesn't have parents. Like, I want to beat the shit out of that guy. I want to go to the guy with the elephant house and like have a talk with that dude too, and be like, nobody rides for free. You don't get out of this for free. But I'm not even kidding. Like, dude, I can't believe someone's allowed to just exist like that. But when we take a look at like what happens to foster kids, whether it's like the homeless, I think a lot of these kids that you see, these people on the street that are like really mentally gone, it's not just drugs. It's a human, tons of trauma that was inflicted on them when they were very young, prison, all that stuff. Is that where they get most of these kids? Because that's a big part. Well, the Franklin scandal involved like at-risk youth, boys, and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when you're talking about like the guys that ran the Franklin scandal, Lawrence King, and then you're talking about Epstein. Now you're talking about guys that, as I said earlier, do not have consciences, and they develop machines to get kids. I mean, they develop these unbelievable machines. Lawrence King got kids out of Boys Town, and that was a steady source for him. And I had a list of 60 victims, Franklin victims, that were sealed. I got all the exhibits that were sealed in the grand jury, and so I had a list of 60 kids that had been molested, and 11 of them were from Boys Town, and then some of them came from foster care. The first kid that came forward had come from foster care, and she was flown around to pedophilic parties. So he had a machine. And then there's always the kids that fall through the cracks, whose parents are drug addicts or alcoholics. There's no shortage of them either. And with Epstein, his machine was and Maxwell helped him build this machine of just all these girls looking for other girls to bring back. And the same thing was with the Franklin scandal too. You would get like $200 if you brought someone back. And with Epstein, I do not know of him plundering any institutions like was done by Lawrence King, but he definitely had the same kind of machinery where a lot of those girls were from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, dysfunctional families.
Yeah, the first time he got convicted, he gave a girl $200. She took it to school in like high school freshman year. They fought over $200. They asked her where she got the money from. He's like, I gave a massage to so and so. The cops start investigating. So it was all for $200. He got caught up over giving some girl $200. They don't know where the money came from. They're poor. They're like, yo, where's the money coming from? Like, what are you doing to get $200? And that's how the investigation started going down. Over $200, low income. My friend told me to do it. I did it. She did it. Here's 200 cash, and it just starts a little rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's and the girls get sucked in because they get attention and they get some money. I mean, when you look at the statistics, and we're talking the Centers for Disease Control, so we're talking, I think, relatively conservative statistics. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 25% of underage girls in America are molested.
What percentage?
25%.
Oh, jeez.
And with boys, it's 7 or 8%, but I think that's higher, and most people think that it's higher, but guys have a hard time copying to that. So this is the pandemic, child abuse that's going on in our country. And if you think about the millions of women and men that have been molested, if they could get together, they would be larger than the Democratic or the Republican Party.
I completely agree. And it gets down to this divide and conquer. And, Rose McGowan was a big part of the Me Too movement, but that gets hijacked. And it's so interesting. I'm watching this Netflix special about that. I think Johnny told me about, or a friend of ours, Jason Tebow, American Nightmare. And, you listen to this woman, she's like, this crazy stuff happened to her and nobody wants to believe her. And it's because they saw a movie called Gone Girl that like they look at her wrong. And I'm sorry people haven't seen, but that doesn't give away the plot. But it's kind of crazy. And then I kind of take a look at like what the Me Too movement has done. And it's like, I'm sorry, everyone can get mad at me, but when you've destroyed men's career with zero evidence, right? Or you have women who were like interested in love and it didn't work out, so now they're like scorn lovers. It does a damage because now when women come forward, people are like, I don't know, we gotta wait to see what happens. And it destroys this slogan, which is believe all women. Well, and it sucks.
I can provide some statistics. There are people that lie about being abused, but they're rare. And there's a U.S. District Court judge in Minnesota. His name is Patrick Schills, and he represented 500 victims of Catholic clergy abuse. Or no, he represented the church against 500 victims of clergy abuse. And he was asked about that, and he said that he felt that, okay, so there were 500 of these people, and he said that he felt less than 10 of them were not telling the truth. So it's really rare.
How many girls? How many women?
There were 500, and he
said less than 10.
Yeah, it was men and women. And he said less than 10. So, because if you come forward, you're going to face a firestorm, especially if you go after a guy like Harvey Weinstein. You're going to face a firestorm. You're going to get black cubed. And that's the way it is with Boys Town. Boys Town has been vicious. Lawrence King plundered Boys Town for years. And there's been so much sexual abuse at Boys Town. Actually, there was an article in the Des Moines Register today about sexual abuse at Boys Town. But there were kids that came forward that were molested at Boys Town. And Boys Town released their psychiatric information to the public. That's how vicious Boys Town is. And Boys Town made it very clear, if you come forward and say you're molested, it's gonna be vicious for you. And so the kids that have come forward, like with Boys Town, which I believe is kind of a cauldron of molestation, for them to come forward and take all that heat, none of them backed down, none of them recanted. They said that they were molested, and Boys Town got all those cases thrown out, most of those cases thrown out on a technicality that some of those cases were predicated on recovered memories, which I do believe that it's dissociative. It's called dissociative amnesia. And actually there's some big shot psychiatrists that fly around the world basically deconstructing victims' accounts of dissociative amnesia, calling it False Memory Syndrome Foundation. So Boys Town hired this big gun from Harvard to debunk these kids. And I've talked to some of those kids, and I've got no doubts that they were abused. So yes, there are people that aren't abused that come forward, but they're a relative minority. I've been at this for about 21 years, and yeah, there are liars, but
no, I'm not going to say that. I listen. Of course, man. I have 2 daughters. I would say we should listen to women. I think what the Me Too movement did in Hollywood, let's just say that, was create. We have a guy out here, Trevor Bauer. We had some people get taken out in Hollywood where there was zero evidence. And the reason I'm saying that is because this adds to the layer of divide and conquer. Because now you have a bunch of people going, oh, I don't want to believe victims. Because someone like Trevor Bauer, where he was like destroyed his entire career. And then it turns out that she basically admitted she was BSing. And only later on when the world came down on her, that that she started then again saying, oh, it's all, no, it actually happened. So I'm with you on that. I just think that we just have, Hollywood having all this kind of like psyops being ran on America causes a lot of chaos. And I think it's really sad because I think women, victims I was molested. I got molested by the local pedophile. My parents left left me there at his house because his kids were my friends. And I got out of the shower and he felt me up, and it's just like, I never told anybody till much later on. And, there's a bunch of stuff in my life that drugs, alcohol, sex addiction, that causes a lot of problems. And I'm not even trying to put myself on the level of a lot of people you talk to. So I myself am a victim and I understand that. And I just think it's sad. What do you think is, I mean, obviously in this day and age, people are attracted to all sorts of different things. But what do you think the psychology of a pedophile is? Because there's been people that I've called out in my world of comedy for being, and they have certain features that just seem like they can't talk to adults. They're like, they have this kind of weird beta kind of energy and they can't talk to adults. And the only way they can feel empowered is to manipulate children. Have you seen it, done any research into any of the characteristics of pedophiles?
I really dug into that because I tried to understand it. I talked to a number of psychologists. A lot of people that molest were molested. I think that's a relatively high percentage. When you get into politics, though, and I interviewed some psychologists in Washington, D.C. that work with pedophiles that don't want to be pedophiles. And they told me when you get into this kind of environment where there's a lot of power at stake, and these guys, they've got the money, they've got women throwing themselves at them, or guys, whatever they want. I mean, they get. But one said that they, at a certain point, they get bored with it and they go for forbidden fruit. And I think that that's a pretty good explanation of the phenomena that we see with both Franklin and Epstein. Is the guys just go younger and younger. And then this happened with Franklin victims, and I know it happened with at least one Epstein victim. Some of these guys start to get violent with the kids. And that's what turns them on, is beating up little boys or beating up little girls.
I would beat their ass.
And the thing about the Epstein network, along with the Franklin network, but the Epstein network has been so sanitized because Maxwell and Epstein were vicious. I mean, vicious sociopaths to these girls. I mean, vicious. Sarah Ransom wrote a book. She's one of the victims. And if you read her book, and the mind games that they played with her were vicious. And the media is really, the government has covered this up, and the media has gone along with it. And the media is good at digging up salacious dirt. And that's the best that they'll do in this situation, which I was going to be on CNN about 2.5 weeks ago when this transfer documents were released. And they called me up because I put the black book on the internet, and they called me up when I talked to the producer. And so we exchanged texts. And then as I talked about it before, I'm the director of Epstein Justice, and we're trying to get justice. We want the perpetrators accountable, and we want the government to tell us why they're covering up child trafficking. But anyway, my last text to him was, I'd really like to talk about Epstein Justice too. And then his next text to me was, we're going to go in a different direction.
Oh, man. All right, guys, real quick, I want to tell you about our boy James McMahon at Copy My Crypto. Let me tell you about Copy My Crypto. We're so sad, too. It's just so sad that people are going to turn their head to. I tried to push back on a guy that was talked about with a lot of evidence in the comedy community, and I got iced out. And it makes me really sad. And I don't enjoy talking about this guy because he showed me a lot of kindness when I was coming. He's one of the few people that did show me kindness. But I know some stuff, and I've expressed it to people, and they're so afraid of facing monsters. They're just so afraid of it. And it makes me really sad.
Well, that's the thing. We have to confront this. We have a government that's, when you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. So we have a government that's aiding and abetting child trafficking in the Epstein case, in the Franklin case, but definitely in the Epstein case, those perpetrators can be indicted. And our government is aiding and abetting child trafficking. Now, would you trust an individual or an entity that is aiding and abetting child trafficking? You would not. So how can we trust our government that is aiding and abetting child trafficking? And that's why the congressional approval rating right now is 17%. And it's very obvious to Americans that our legislators aren't acting in our best interest. They're completely scaling back our constitutional rights regarding being spied on. They're creating laws that make the rich richer and the poor poor. There's just a lot of the legislation is very skewed. And I believe that a lot of them are compromised, and then some of them you don't even need to compromise because they're willing to make Faustian pacts, and they just want power. And, and all the things that go with power.
You would say that the tapes are real, right? Obviously. Some blackmail tapes. I'm just wondering, do you think that any of those people compromise is because they know that those tapes are not held by the government?
Well, those tapes, I mean, Epstein's safe was drilled, and they had hundreds of DVDs. There were hundreds of DVDs in that safe. And I'm pretty sure, because some of them were young, redacted plus redacted. So, and I think a lot of it, there was child pornography, but then I think a lot of it was blackmail stuff. And then when Epstein killed himself, the feds said the case is closed. And I thought, wow, the case is closed. So I put in a Freedom of Information Act request, not for the DVDs, but for the reports on the DVDs. And I got a response back that said the case was ongoing. So
that's interesting. So they want both ways, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's but yeah, Epstein, all his houses were wired for audiovisual blackmail, and the island too. And Craig Spence of the Franklin scandal, he had a mansion in D.C., the Calabama section of D.C., and his house was wired for audiovisual blackmail too. And Henry Vincent, who I wrote a book with, Confessions of a D.C. Madam, he was with King and Spence, the two pimps of the Franklin scandal, and they were both sociopaths, narcissistic, and cokeheads. And then all of a sudden, Craig Spence, and Henry doesn't know about what, Henry's just a naive kid that bought an escort service from someone for $10,000. So he has no idea of how he's completely over his head. So Spence starts asking Henry questions about like his school, where he went to school, where he grew up, and where he went to college, and where did he study. Henry was a funeral director, where he studied mortuary sciences, and Henry thought like the Red Sea was opening up. I mean, because Spence was like this bundle of narcissism, and Spence seemed to be taking an interest in Henry. And then Spence started talking to Henry about Henry's escort service, and Henry was talking about his escort service. And then at a certain point, Spence got up and went like this to Henry, and Henry followed him through a closet, and then in the closet there was like a secret panel, and that opened up to a bunch of monitors. And Spence hit some buttons, and then there's Henry looking at a monitor, talking about running an escort service. And Spence said, I blackmail people, and you're my latest victim. And we know from two victims of Epstein that there was hidden cameras in all the bedrooms and bathrooms in his New York townhouse, or New York mansion, I guess we should call it. And that there was a secret room where there was all monitors and that there were men, as in plural, looking at these monitors. So the CIA, there was Operation Midnight Climax in the 60s. Yeah. And the CIA has been doing stuff like that forever. Unfortunately, the CIA has turned that malignancy upon Americans, which is it's just power only seeks to perpetuate itself. That's really the bottom line.
There is a giant belief that a lot of this is Mossad driven, but me personally, I think Mossad, CIA, MI6, I think they're all the same people. They just have different territories, and and that's not deflecting from Mossad. I think Mossad is right there in it. We've seen the Brofmans. They're part of the mega group, which was, a Zionist kind of first organization that did whatever it could to control that narrative and use whatever they could to do that. Do you think that Epstein was a Mossad, basically operation? We lost you again.
Look,
there we go. I don't know why we keep going out. That's so weird.
It's my microphone is probably getting thrown out the window after this interview. It's been causing me a lot of trouble. I was telling your two pals. I believe that the Mossad the Mossad blackmails people, the CIA blackmails people, MI6 blackmails people. And Epstein might have been working with the Mossad. It's conceivable. He was a good friend of Ehud Barak and provided Ehud Barak with underage girls. Ehud Barak was a former prime minister of Israel. But there's no way that the CIA is going to allow the Mossad to compromise American politicians on American soil and not get a cut of that intelligence. That is not going to happen. So, I mean, people that are anti-Semitic say Epstein was Mossad, but no, that's not the case. I mean, he might have been working with the Mossad, but he was definitely working with the CIA too. Is the Mossad going to have the power to tell a U.S. attorney to stand down? The CIA will, but will the Mossad have that power? I don't know.
So there's a whole discussion between conspiracy theorists and new regular people about Trump's relationship with Epstein. What are your thoughts on that? There was whole belief that a real estate deal went sideways. They were basically mocking Trump for being paper rich, cash poor, that he kind of did some shenanigans behind Epstein's back and grabbed the Mar-a-Lago, and then there's all that. What are your thoughts on that?
That's kind of a conundrum. So Alfredo Rodriguez was the guy that originally stole Epstein's black book. And he called up an attorney who was representing some of the Epstein victims. And he wanted to sell the black book to the attorney. And the attorney called the FBI, and the FBI did a sting. And Rodriguez had circled all the names that he had personally seen at Epstein's place. And most of them are pedophiles. Trump's name is circled. Trump denied that he was ever at Epstein's house, and we know from a deposition that is not true. Trump tells a lot of lies, so it's difficult to know which lies are germane to the situation and which lies aren't. There seems to have been a chasm between those two, but I don't know. I just don't know how deep Trump was with Clinton or with Epstein. Now, Epstein had 25 contact numbers for Clinton. Clinton was on the island. Actually, Epstein was bringing women into the White House for Clinton when Clinton was the president. So I don't have any problems pointing the finger at Clinton. With Trump, it's a different thing because none of the underage girls have said that they saw Trump, but that doesn't necessarily, only 225 girls have come forward. And Epstein had a voracious addiction for young girls, to 3 a day.
What would you say the number was? I know it'd be a crazy estimate, but if we think 250, that sounds like a lot. What do you thinking, or
225? Well, Epstein had 3 underage girls a day for a number of years, and then he's pandering them, so it's in the hundreds for sure. I mean, I would say, I mean, I'm just kind of extrapolating, but I would say we're talking around 2000. And he ran this network for 25 years. He ran a pedophile network for 25 years. So, and one thing I found out with Franklin, and I've talked about it, these guys make machines, and their sole function is to get them children. And there were a lot more than 225 girls that got molested by Jeffrey Epstein and his ilk. And
what
if you were molested by Donald Trump, I'm throwing out a hypothetical, or Bill Clinton, would you come forward? I mean, you were a girl that was abused by these guys. Would you come forward? And guys like Epstein, they tell their victims, you know, you come forward and we're going to murder you. We're going to murder your family. That sort of Damocles is always wielded over victims' heads.
I mean, they killed a guy that told you he was going to kill your family. You're scared.
Yeah.
It's yeah. And it's interesting. I had a death threat when I was working on Franklin, the first time I was in Nebraska, and I'd never had one of those before. So that was, you know, that gave me some pause, as to whether or not I wanted to proceed. But I felt like it was just so evil what had happened to all these kids, because
it's so bad.
According to federal law enforcement and state law enforcement, not one kid that was molested in the Franklin network was molested. There was no child abuse in the Franklin network. And a girl, Alicia Owen, who wouldn't recant her abuse, who was looking at 200 years in prison, was sentenced to between 9 and 15 years for perjury. And the authorities really tried to destroy her. They put her in solitary confinement for 2 years. A kid, a 21-year-old kid, is thrown in solitary confinement for 2 years. And as I said earlier, I'm the director of Epstein Justice, and she's an associate director of Epstein Justice. She has turned out to be an exemplary human being. I don't know how she did it. She went back to college, got amazing grades. She's happily married. She owns her own home. I mean, after getting molested, after getting trafficked by these psychopaths, and then having the judiciary molest her again, I just think Alicia's story really needs to be made into a Hollywood movie, because I haven't seen, very seldom do you see a profile on courage like that.
Why do you think, how did they discover it was Epstein? Like, you know, I have this theory that Pornhub blew up because it was used as an intelligence data operation to kind of figure out who was into the weirder stuff and who had political aspirations based on further research. How does Epstein show up out of nowhere and become the guy that leads this whole thing?
Again, this is hypothetical thought. You had Lawrence King and Craig Spence. They were the primary pimps in the Franklin network. And Lawrence King, they were in Southeast Asia during Vietnam. Lawrence King was with the Air Force. He had a top security clearance. He was in Thailand. And Spence was an ABC reporter in Vietnam. And my thinking on this is they probably got busted molesting young Asian boys when they were in Southeast Asia. And they ultimately were turned by this dark, malignant corner of intelligence, because as soon as they come back to the United States, their careers just explode. Just explode. And I think the same thing with Epstein too, because at some point, and I don't know if it was at Dalton or where it was, but I think at some point he got turned, where the people in intelligence saw, well, he's a smart guy and he's a pedophile and he can run a pedophile network for us. And what Epstein, Spence, and King have in common is they all come from essentially working class backgrounds, and no one has a lot of power that's going to go to bat for them. If they're going down, they're easy to take down. They're great fall guys. As arrogant as they are and as much power as they have, it can be taken away from them like that. And I think that we saw that happen in all three cases.
It's incredible. And, you know, he shows up and then he has all that stuff going on with, and it's very weird, like Ghislaine Maxwell, how she like didn't even run. She like just hid in like New Hampshire or Connecticut, just kind of hid out until, are you amazed that she even, one, is in jail and two, she's alive?
Well, King is still alive.
He's still alive. You think he's still alive? Ooh.
Oh, King is alive. I keep trying.
Yeah.
King tries to inveigle himself into groups that would give him access to children.
Still does?
Yeah, he inveigled himself into Granville Academy, and Granville Academy it's not even a school. It takes lower socioeconomic kids on field trips. As soon as I found out about that, I inundated Granville Academy with phone calls, and then I got him kicked out of Granville Academy. And then he shows up at the Washington Redskins event committee. And then I inundated them with phone calls, and then he got kicked out of that. But then he shows up at Opera Nova, which teaches lower socioeconomic kids how to sing. And then I got him kicked out of that. So, and he's at this church now that I'm trying to get him kicked out of.
What's the church? Let's help.
It's, I can't think of the name, but I can definitely provide it to you.
Yes, please do. We would like to help you
via email, because they don't really seem to, I mean, these other organizations that I've harangued jettisoned King pretty quickly, and this church doesn't seem to want to jettison King, which kind of really casts a very negative light on them.
Oh, find out the name.
Yeah, I'll definitely email you the name.
Why does it seem like they're always so persistent? Like there's these YouTube channels as well where like they've been caught more than once. There was like this huge YouTuber that's been caught 3 times with the same shit with pedo stuff, and it's just like they don't like.
Well, because they're all in on it. Like it's the rock of power. It's like it's the core of power is to. They're like, it's like gang jumping in, like they everybody murders somebody so no one could ever call authorities on the other one. We all have something on everybody, right?
And plus it's an addiction for these guys. Lawrence King, Jeffrey Epstein, those guys are addicts. They're pedophilic addicts, and they've got to, like I said, Epstein was molesting 3 minors a day. So that is a highly pathological appetite. And who knows? And, when we were talking about numbers, he had been doing that for a number of years. But then you factor in all these girls that he pandered these guys to. And I think you get very substantial numbers, and over the course of 25 years.
So there's this big hoop to do about the transcripts from Ghislaine Maxwell's trial coming out, and the list is coming out, and I go, well, the list doesn't mean anything unless we know what they ordered, and they've been slow rolling this out. We have some Jane Doe or John Doe that doesn't want its name out. What are your thoughts on all of that? Are we going to get the list? Does the list matter?
There's no list.
Okay.
There's no list. It was much ado about nothing, really. I mean, I've got that trance of documents. And The closest thing we're going to get to a list is the Black Book that I put up on the internet in 2015. That's the closest thing we're going to get. There's no list. It cracks me up. I mean, that's why CNN was going to have me on, is because the list was going to come out, and I put the Black Book up, and then CNN thought, well, this is Nick Bryant, and he actually cares about justice for victims, so I guess we can't have him on. Fox was going to have me on, and a young producer had read my book, and this is when Sandusky was going down, and she wanted me to come on Fox, and she contacted me through my publisher, and the publisher got a hold of me. And then a senior producer contacted my publisher, and the publisher gave her my number, and I talked to her. I talked to her for about 2 minutes, the senior producer. And she told my publisher that I was incoherent. Now, there's a lot of people that have accused me of a lot of things, but no one's ever accused me of being incoherent.
I would agree.
So she had to lie to my publisher to make sure that I was going to be on Fox television. And that's what happens when you want justice for kids that have been abused. And writing the Franklin scandal really hurt my career. I mean, I wouldn't make a U-turn ever. When I got into this 21 years ago, I realized, after the death threat and some other stuff, I realized, this is pretty dangerous. And, but I thought, all these kids have been destroyed and no one's paid a price. And it just made me so angry. It made me so enraged. And, I spent 7 years writing that book with the research, and then Epstein came up. And I can remember when I was pitching the Franklin scandal, no magazine wanted to touch it, no publisher in New York wanted to touch it up, but I was pitching it. I had 2 agents. The first agent read the book proposal, and that was it. She hit the jettison button. A second agent, was a good agent, Mr. Cheryl, tried to sell it, and he couldn't do it either. And I would sit with these publishers, and they would just talk about libel. And I said to them, these guys are so dirty that, and I've got so much stuff on them, especially after I got all the documents from that, sealed documents from that grand jury, that we do not have to worry about that. We do not have to worry about libel. And same thing with Epstein. But my drive to expose this, and I've spoken at anti-trafficking conferences, and international and national, and I've met so many people that have been trafficked, and I know a lot about it at this point. I didn't, 21 years ago, I knew nothing about any of this. So, but when I was talking to people about Epstein, or when I was talking to people about Franklin, trying to sell Franklin, they were saying, well, this can't be going on now. And I said, of course it's going on now. Wherever there's a demand, there's a supply, and there's a demand here. And when they were being incredulous about it not going on now, Epstein was full tilt boogie. So that's and there are other networks like
Peter Nygaard just got busted. He got found guilty, and no, we don't really hear anything but that. But he's up there. There's a lot of craziness going on with Canada and a bunch of these indigenous school systems, stuff going on with that. It's just sad to me. It's just sad. It makes me sad. And then you have very popular, like other third world countries where it's like, that's their industry. Like they just destroy their future by sacrificing their youth. It makes me so sad.
The United States doesn't do very well with its youth. Like 22% of American children are growing up below the poverty threshold. A number of million of them, 2 or 3 million of them, don't even have health care. Families with children are a fast-growing segment of the homeless population.
Nick,
when you combine all these factors, we've got billionaires and billionaires and billionaires, and you've got all these kids, and there are scores of children, and there's been studies that go hungry, that experience hunger at least once a week. So we have, as a society, all this money, but we don't really care about our children, and that is a huge problem. Because, and what I see going on with children, the homelessness, the no health care, dealing with hunger, it's kind of a wholesale destruction of children. And what we've got with Epstein is a retail destruction of children. Wherever there's a wholesale destruction, there's going to be a retail destruction. And that's what we have to contend with now. And it's really, if there was a study, I wrote a book called America's Children Transfer Tragedy that came out in 1995, where I looked at lower socioeconomic children and the pitfalls. And it's gotten much worse, although more of them have healthcare now. When I wrote it, millions of them didn't have healthcare. But there was a study done by a University of Michigan researcher. His name was Greg Duncan. And he found that if a child is born at a low birth weight, which is generally because the mother doesn't have prenatal care, and subjected to 5 years of continuous poverty, if they're white, their IQ is going to be 90. If they're black, their IQ is going to be 85. So they're out of the game. I mean, they're 5 years old and they aren't going to be able to participate in society. So, and we have the money to remedy that.
Yes.
And we have the money, and we have the laws to remedy Epstein, and we are not. So that's why Epstein justice is so important. It's going to be a battle, but look at workers' rights, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights. They all started out as grassroots movements, and they became huge, and they changed laws. Now it's time for children's rights. Wow. And the reason why we don't have children's rights is children don't vote. They don't have any money.
Yeah. They can't march. They can't set up a march. They can't show up. They can't set up a boycott. That's in comedy right now. It's like the Hollywood has demonized every kind of joke about anybody because those groups can rally and try to cancel you. Kids can't do that. Kids can't show up and protest you and get you canceled for this joke or that joke. So one of the last things that all these really edgy comics are doing are pedophile jokes. And it's like, it infuriates me, even though I'll defend everyone's right to do whatever jokes they want to. I got to defend comedy at all costs. But if we're going to play this punching up and punching down BS, okay, there's no bigger punching down than children getting sex trafficked because they can't do anything to stop it.
And that's why we have to act. That's why epsteinjustice.com is so important, because we have to act now. And plus, with Congressman Boucher from Tennessee, him coming out last month and saying that a bunch of his colleagues are compromised. For a guy that's the only time I've ever, and I've studied this, and that's the only time a federal legislator has come out and said, my colleagues are compromised and blackmailed. So what we've got a putrid system where the congressional approval rating is 17%. Now, if we drill down on that Epstein issue, we will come across the cesspool that makes it so the congressional approval rating is only 17%. We will come across that cesspool that where 83% of Americans think that what the Congress is doing hurts them, is not beneficial to them. We will come across that sewer, and then we can clean it down. And as I said, these battles are not easy with civil rights, women's rights, gay rights. They're not easy, but this is it's the time has come for the battle for children's rights.
I agree, man. I agree. One more time, Nick, can you tell them where they could find you?
You can find me at two places, nickbryantnyc.com, And then I also have the Nick Bryant podcast. And then I would strongly suggest that you go to epsteinjustice.com. We've got a petition there that you can sign, and we have a form letter, and you put your name and where you live, and it goes directly to your federal congressmen and congresswomen. So epsteinjustice.com is, and we're picking up momentum. It's kind of exciting thing. When I started this 21 years ago, I couldn't get anybody to listen to me. And now we're finally picking up momentum. So it's a good thing.
Well, Nick, you're doing the Lord's work, and I'm going to stand there with you. The link is below. Guys, click it, sign it up. If you figure out who that church is, that doesn't seem
I will tell you that church shortly. Yes.
Okay. If you don't know who it is, and if you think we could help you in any way by applying pressure to them, to get rid of that stuff, I just don't understand how these things operate and how anybody is okay with any of this. But Nick, I appreciate you coming on. It means a lot to us. We enjoyed this show a lot. It's very eye-opening. It's very tragic to me that we don't all gear up to protect children, especially the people on the left in Hollywood who are all in therapy to deal with most likely childhood trauma. And they don't see like we could stop the cycle if we just step in and protect the people who can't protect themselves. Nick, thank you so much. Go to his websites. They're all listed below. And we appreciate you so much, man. Guys, stay tuned. We're going to do a little breakdown of the episode here. And thank you guys for listening.
Have a good night.
Good night, Nick. Thank you so much. All right, let's break. These are the hard conversations to have. It's not fun. I'm a comedian. You guys are comics. We're trying our hardest, and these are the conversations we have to keep this stuff alive, because, the Epstein stuff comes out and then bang, Cat Williams kind of steals that thunder. And then we're moving on to World War III and everyone moves on. And it's just like, I don't know why it is an argument like we have to protect children. I just don't get it. I just don't get it.
I was mind blown when he said next is children rights. I thought that was already in the books, but it's not, obviously, as you could tell, it's not.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to me, dude. It's kind of it's kind of sad, and it's crazy. The thing about, that, the 500 people, 10 of them were lying. I respect that, and I do think there is something to it. I think the Me Too movement was something completely different. That's my honest opinion. We've, whether it's, what's his name from the Pirates of the Caribbean?
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp with Amber Heard.
Yeah.
I mean, we just seen this over and over. And, as much as we all think Marilyn Manson is a complete utter retard, it turns out that lady was BSing too. And the reason that is the cause division. So I think it did do damage. But overall, I think what he's saying is amazing. And I think he is important. And I can't believe that these people are just allowed to go. And I see it in my own, in the comedy scene where people are just like, yeah, it's no big deal. Who cares? I don't care. It's like, dude, and, a lot of it comes from people who don't have kids too. They're just like, I don't care, because they have no future. Once they take their last breath, their investment in humanity is done.